really excited to be joined this morning by Peter Beinart. He is a professor of political science and journalism at the City University of New York, and he also is author of the Beinart Notebook on Substack. Recommend that you all to subscribe to that. Great to see you, Peter.
Good to see you, sir.
Nice to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get into some of what you've been writing about, but first off the top, we've got some breaking news this morning, which is that President Biden has extended an invitation to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after Netanyahu decided to at least pause these judicial reforms. What do you make of the invitation and the timing?
Maybe they saw it as a payoff to Netanyahu for having delayed this judicial overhaul effort. It's not surprising that an American president would invite any Israeli prime minister, given how close a relationship the U.S. and Israel have. Now, whether it's morally justified, given the fact that it's an apartheid state by the world's leading human rights organizations, and in fact, Israel's leading human rights organizations, not to mention Palestinian human rights organizations, is a different question. But in the political reality that exists in Washington, it's not surprising that Netanyahu would get an invitation.
Yeah, okay, got it. And so, Peter, if we're digging into the bigger situation here, we've got protests all over Israel. How should we make sense of this in terms of Israeli domestic politics and then the way that the U.S. has approached the protest movement?
So what you have among Jewish Israelis is a kind of a culture war that has certain analogs to what you see in the United States. First of all, you have a corrupt prime minister who's trying to bend the judicial system to make sure he doesn't get prosecuted. That might sound somewhat familiar to us. Secondly, Israeli Jewish society is deeply divided along religious versus secular lines. This is the most religious government in Israeli history. And one of the things that it wants to do is ensure that ultra-Orthodox Israeli Jews do not have to serve in the military, which is a very, very divisive issue among Israeli Jewish society. You also have an ultra-nationalist, even fascist element in the government that wants to prevent the Supreme Court from allowing it to go even further in seizing land from Palestinians. The Supreme Court already allows the Israeli government to seize land from Palestinians fairly easily, but there are elements in this government that I think whose ultimate agenda is the expulsion of Palestinians, and they want to ensure the Supreme Court can't get in the way of that. So those are the cluster of issues that have produced this fight, which is really among Jewish Israelis, with Palestinians largely as bystanders.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's a piece that you've been writing about and speaking about on your Substack. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from Peter. You say that in a certain kind of bizarre way, it's almost worse, more painful to see the lengths that Israeli Jews are willing to go to fight for democracy for themselves, given that most of them and most diaspora Jews are so profoundly oblivious or dismissive or even hostile to the idea that Palestinians should also have democracies themselves. Here in this tweet, you say, if Jewish Israelis truly invited Palestinians to join their democratic struggle and made it a struggle for freedom for everyone, not just for Jews, that movement wouldn't just defeat Bibi, it would defeat apartheid and change the world. So talk a little bit about the lens through which Palestinians must be viewing these protests.
Right. So first, we have to understand the reality. About 80% of the Palestinians who live under Israeli control are not citizens, cannot become citizens of the state in which they live, and cannot vote for the government that controls their lives. These are the Palestinians who live under military occupation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, those who live under Israeli blockade in Gaza. The 20% of Palestinians are Israeli citizens, but even they are citizens of a very profoundly second-class nature. So again, to use a crude analogy, it's almost as if you were in the kind of white segregated American South and you had this huge protest movement because you saw a white politician who seemed like they were going to erode the democratic rights of white Southerners. And then you'd have black people looking and saying, wait a second here. This is really bizarre that you're kind of launching this democracy movement as if we don't even exist when we are denied all basic democratic rights. There have been some Palestinian politicians inside Israel who have thought, well, we should support these protests because what Netanyahu is doing would allow the government to abuse us even more. But I think the dominant reaction from Palestinian intellectuals and activists on the ground and in the diaspora has been that there's something really perverse and bizarre and insulting about Israelis launching a movement to protect democracy when Palestinians who constitute more than half of the people under Israeli control don't live in a democracy. And I think that was the point I was trying to highlight.
Got it. Peter, how should people who are looking at this, one of the takeaway I've seen is that this actually might bring down the Netanyahu government. Just for context, because I don't think people understand the roiling nature of Israel's like constant shuffling of government. How realistic of a possibility is that? Does the, as you said, religious kind of ultra-nationalist coalition, will it remain together? And how core is judicial overhaul actually to Netanyahu's tenuous grip on power?
If I had to guess, I would guess the government will not fall, because what's happened as a result of these protests is that the government has actually become pretty unpopular. And so in a parliamentary system, if you're unpopular, you don't want to bring down your government and go to elections because you're not going to do very well. So I think that for that reason, I think this coalition is likely to hang together. There were elements in this coalition that really wanted judicial overhaul, but not everyone in this coalition wanted judicial overhaul. And my guess would be that they will now focus on pursuing other strategies of things they want to do that are that will not produce quite as ferocious a backlash. But I'm not sure. They're pausing it till May, and I think what'll partly determine it is whether this protest movement continues or whether it peters out and they feel like they have a little bit more political kind of runway to go on.
Got it.
Part of the deal that was struck here involves creating a new civil National Guard, which looks like it will be led by a far-right politician, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the current Minister of National Security and member of the Jewish Power Party. Can you talk about that development, what it means, and how it's being received?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm searching for analogies for American. In some ways, it's a little bit kind of like taking some very, very far right person in the Trump orbit and kind of turning the Proud Boys into some kind of National Guard. I mean, Ben-Gvir is someone who's really been flirted with the edges of terrorism his entire career, was actually considered so much of was involved in the group of people who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister, in the mid-1990s, even though he himself was not fingered for that. Was a longtime devotee and follower of Rabbi Meir Kahane, whose entire political identity was wrapped up with the idea of expelling Palestinians, and who for many years in his home had a poster of a man named Baruch Goldstein, a terrorist who walked into the Tomb of the Patriarchs, the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron in 1994, and massacred, I think, 29 Palestinians while they were in prayer. So this man's basic agenda is to free the Israeli military and police from any restrictions on their ability to brutalize Palestinians, I think with the ultimate aim of trying to expel Palestinians. So an utterly lawless human being. So to put this guy in charge of some kind of private security force, it's not clear, frankly, how many people will actually serve in this. But imagine what this means for Palestinians who don't have their own police force and army that can protect them, who are basically defenseless in the face of the Israeli military and police as it stands now. And then you're going to give this guy authority of some special unit. I mean, it's a really terrifying situation.
Yeah. And finally, Peter, a question that I think is at the core of all of this, as you see Israeli Jews fighting so hard for their democracy, while, as you put it, the Palestinian majority is completely denied any voice or any democratic say. Can you have a democracy in an ethno state?
I think fundamentally no, because I think at the core of liberal democracy is the idea of equality under the law, irrespective of your race, religion, ethnicity. And there is a global struggle we see all around the world between this idea of equality under the law and the idea that countries should be the property of one racial, religious, ethnic tribe. You see it in India, where Narendra Modi is trying to turn India into a Hindu state. You see it, of course, in the United States, where we have powerful forces that want to make this a white Christian state. In Europe as well, similar forces like that. And so the notion, we have gotten so used to talking about Israel as a Jewish and democratic state that I think people don't think enough about the fundamental contradictions of that idea. And the problem is that Israel has actually become a model for the kind of ethno state that people all around the world who threaten the idea of liberal democracy are trying to create, even including in our own country. So no, I think what I would hope is that one day Israel becomes a state for all its citizens, a state that treats everybody the same way legally, irrespective of what religion they are. And I think that's the fight that we need to have all across the world.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you joining us, Peter. Really appreciate your insight and your analysis on this. I know there's a lot going on here, and we're all trying to make sense of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.